There are 15 terms you need to know when buying a home in Massachusetts, and we're getting started right now. Before we get started on the terms you need to know, please know that your agent or brokerage that you have hired is bound by confidentiality. The agent or anyone working for you must not disclose any part of the transaction unless directed by you. All those professionals that you hire on your behalf do communicate and share information in order to move the process along. And you do want this to happen so the purchase of the property and the eventual sale is completed on time. If you do not hire a real estate agent, then you are responsible for knowing all of the processes, laws, negotiation strategies, and financial issues surrounding a home purchase. Let's get started with the 15 terms you need to know. An offer. An offer to purchase real estate is a written contract used to delineate the proposed real estate transaction. It is presented to the seller from the buyer, and the offer will list out the buyer's names, a description of the property, the offer price, the amount of the offer deposit, usually $1,000, the amount of the purchase and sale deposit, usually 5%, the dates the whole process will take place, the offer, the execution of the purchase and sale, the mortgage commitment date, and the closing date. Conditions of an offer. Conditions are in all offers and refer to specific action steps that need to take place for the real estate sale to be executed. However, it can get confusing because within each action step there could be several milestones that must also be completed. For example, in order to receive a mortgage commitment letter, the buyer must submit an application for a mortgage, have the appraisal completed, purchase home insurance, and the buyer must meet the terms of the loan. Technically, 4 action items in 1 milestone. Common conditions of an offer to purchase. Typically, we see that the buyer must sell an existing home before a purchase can be completed. The buyer must receive a mortgage approval from the bank or a lending institution. A house must appraise at or above the purchase price. The seller must arrange to have repairs completed before the buyer takes possession, such as mold or radon remediation, painting, cleaning of the carpets, or making other repairs. An offer deposit. Typically in Massachusetts, depending upon where the home is being purchased, the initial deposit with the offer can range anywhere from $500 to $5,000. Most of the time it's $1,000, and it's a personal check is usually the form of payment. The amount of the deposit is also tied to the type of housing market. In a buyer's market, the buyer determines the dollar amount, and in the seller's market, the opposite is true. An offer deposit is an initial deposit of money that is given to the seller with the offer to indicate the intent to purchase the home. This deposit is held in escrow until the date of purchase. This money is also refundable to you if you choose not to move forward with the purchase. Once some of the milestones are met, then the deposit is not refundable. Also, should the negotiation specifically indicate the deposit money is not refundable, then the terms of the negotiated contract shall prevail. If the buyer makes an offer and includes a home inspection period, typically the buyer can back out of the transaction and get their offer deposit money back minus the cost of the home inspection, which has been paid for separately. The grounds for the return of the deposit money are numerous. However, one example includes the house didn't meet the buyer's expectations, or the house cannot meet the loan term requirements. For example, peeling paint, cracked windows, torn carpet are not allowed on FHA loans. A home inspection is an optional part of the process. Most real estate agents recommend completing the home inspection, and typically the home buying process in Massachusetts, it's about 10 days for that inspection to occur after the date of the accepted offer. A home inspector is a third-party independent contractor that will evaluate the house from a structural and safety perspective. Just as many service professions, there are good and bad inspectors. Typically, there is a checklist every inspector uses, and they go through it methodically throughout the entire house. Their knowledge can be invaluable as they are comparing the current situation with current code regulations. A home inspection can take anywhere from 2 to 5 hours depending upon the size of the house. It's a great day to take off from work and from other obligations. Additionally, most inspectors do not look at detached sheds, but they will inspect garages whether they are detached or attached. In general, they are looking for anything that would compromise the structure. For example, pests, water, potential fire issues, health issues like mold, asbestos, lead, radon. Each home inspection company charges different rates and provides different services. Otherwise, it would be something as to price fix. So check around for an inspector that meets your time frame and your level of evaluation. As mentioned, home inspections are not required in the law. In some cases, buyers waive the home inspection if they are competing with other buyers. Sometimes sellers also complete their own pre-home inspection so as to speed the process along, or put the buyers at ease so they know nothing's wrong with the house before they make an offer. Other times, the buyers state the home inspection is for information purposes only. So even if the results of the home inspection are not favorable, they are accepting those conditions and will move forward with the purchase. This is an area where a real estate agent that you have hired will really negotiate on your behalf. Home inspection can be an overwhelming day for buyers, but at the same time, it's very hard to get back into the house. So if you are really going to buy the house, it's a good day to bring a tape measure and measure things not on floor plans, such as windows, space between windows, stairwells, doorwell openings, fireplace openings, and depth of the firebox, washer and dryer space, refrigerator space. You can see there's a lot of things to measure. So the sellers don't want to let the buyers back in. Why? Well, they think that the buyers are probably going to back out. The other reason is oftentimes the house isn't show ready. And one thing to keep in mind is not to purchase anything while the mortgage is in process. Large purchases like furniture and appliances can really derail your mortgage, and you guessed it, cause you not to get the loan. Appraisal. An appraisal is a method the bank uses to verify the property the buyer wants to purchase is equal to the value the buyer is willing to pay. The bank orders the appraisal, and the order request is sent to a third-party vendor that is assigned the appraisal, and the appraisal professional completes the review of the subject property and similarly sold properties within the last 3 to 6 months. And the subject property is reviewed and analyzed based on commonly accepted appraisal standards, and a specific value is given. The value is given for that property and is valid for that day only. The reason for this is it stems from the fact market conditions can exist one day and the very next day it changes. An example of market change typically given in the industry includes 9/11. One day you had certain market conditions and the very next day the financial markets changed. This caveat was not the result of 9/11, but it was implemented actually in the 1980s due to a savings and loan scandal, where banks were holding mortgage loans on property much higher than what the value of the property was worth due to a financial crisis. We then again had another 2008 financial crisis where there were other issues in the financial sector which impacted the housing market for multiple years. If you are buying a property and plan to hold the property for more than 10 years, you most likely will not be wrapped up in these debacles, but the economy will always play a role in the property value. So it is a good idea to understand housing markets and the valuation techniques used by financial institutions. Clean title. A title search is completed prior to ownership transfer, and the property must have clean title, or another way to say without encumbrances prior to the ownership change. Encumbrances can be things such as property taxes owed, liens for payment where the vendor completed the work but was never paid, people having ownership to a property but have not agreed to sell, for example in an estate sale. Before a property can be sold, the property needs to be free and clear of all of these issues that are attached to the previous owners. It is the responsibility of the current property owner to take care of all of these issues and pay for the removal of the encumbrances should there be any. When the property is sold, most of the time, if there is a lender or a bank involved, they will want you to purchase lender's title insurance. They will also give you an option of purchasing owner's title insurance. These policies will protect you if there is a mistake and the property was not clean when the transfer occurred. A notable example I was told about included an attorney requested a local town to provide the final payoff for property taxes. The town submitted the bill, and several days later, the town called and said, "Oh, we forgot to add in last quarter." The house transaction had closed and the funds had been dispersed. Therefore, the title insurance kicked in because there was a problem with clean title from the previous owners. Fortunately, the insurance premium covered the outstanding bill and the error the town had made. Property disclosures. A property disclosure form is a common practice in real estate in Massachusetts, but it is not required by the law and therefore is not part of the formal process. In the state of Massachusetts, it is buyer beware. So when you select an agent, make sure they know exactly where to find the answers for you and at least guide you in the right direction so you can get your questions answered. Typically, there are over 50 questions that some big companies have their sellers answer. It is a good guide, but don't worry if the house you're buying doesn't have this document, as you should be independently verifying property conditions. The real issue is, what is the current state of the property at the time of the purchase? No better way to understand current conditions than to have your property evaluated by a home inspector and go to town hall. Sometimes it is helpful for buyers to understand the utility costs so they know what the total outlay will be for the house on a monthly basis. The utility companies will not provide this information as they view it as confidential, so the only place you have as a resource is the seller. Oftentimes the seller is willing to provide the information, but sometimes the sellers have passed away and the costs are not available. Most of the time, with respect to the disclosures, answers can be found at the governmental entities that issue permits. Purchase and sale contract. The purchase and sale contract is a final contract between the buyer and seller, and a lot of action steps take place after this document is executed. It is important to get this document correct because once all the parties sign, any changes to the contract must be made in writing and all parties must agree. That's not so easy, as multiple parties are included in just one side of the transaction and money is being spent. The purchase and sale contract is the base taken from the initial offer, and then typically any changes are the result of the home inspection. It's incorporated into the purchase and sale. Some attorneys prepare the purchase and sale and then they add addendums such as a repair addendum that delineates the repairs required prior to the sale of the property. It depends on the situation and the financing as to how the deal is crafted. All dates and terms of the contract must be adhered to, or that party that has not met the terms is in breach. This is another critical juncture where an agent's negotiation skill really makes a difference. The purchase and sale contract is drawn up by attorneys in the state of Massachusetts. The attorneys work on the buyer's and seller's behalf and then provide the final document whereby both parties execute the document. For the seller, once it is executed, the seller cannot back out of the sale. For the buyer, well, this starts the process of getting the mortgage. If the buyer is purchasing with cash, then all the conditions normally associated with the mortgage approval process are waived. And there too, the buyers are locked into the sale. Well, sort of. Let's say it's never over till it's over. Purchase and sale deposit. The purchase and sale deposit is the second deposit and is submitted to the listing brokerage and held in escrow until the sale is completed. All escrow monies, including the offer deposit monies, are put toward the purchase of the property. Should there be a dispute, the listing brokerage is required by law to hold the money in escrow until the dispute is resolved. Typically, all parties must agree in writing, and the attorneys or the courts will provide written direction as to the disbursement of such funds. Typically, the purchase and sale deposit is no more than 5% of the purchase price. Most listing agents require this amount, so if you are the buyer, recognize these funds must be available in cash and typically within 10 days from the date of the accepted offer. Most companies accept personal checks. It is a good idea to have the deposit check to give to the buyer agent when you're making the offer, so the agent has the tools necessary to meet the contractual milestones. The deposits secure the transaction. If the deposit money does not show up, the contract is not enforceable. One clarification, the 5% is the total amount, typically including the offer and the purchase of deposit. Mortgage commitment letter and due date. The mortgage commitment letter for buyers and sellers is very important because it represents the lender is willing to lend the amount between the down payment and the purchase price to the buyer on a specific piece of property. It is very customized to the buyer and to the property. It is important to realize once the mortgage commitment has been issued, the professional teams on both sides are working to get the final contractual requirements completed, like deeds signed, mortgage documents issued, fire inspections completed. And when the mortgage commitment letter is issued, all parties recognize the transaction is in the final stages. The sellers need to move out, and the buyers need to arrange for utility transfers to move in. Should the mortgage commitment letter not be issued, the agent or the attorney must notify the seller in writing that the mortgage commitment letter has not been obtained. Sometimes there's an extension is all that is required because sometimes the underwriters just need a few more days to determine whether or not the loan could be issued based on some determining factor. Other times there are conditions of the mortgage commitment letter that is technically called a conditional mortgage commitment letter, and those conditions must be satisfied prior to final purchase. It can range from anything such as an additional pay stub from the last 2 weeks or an additional bank statement, gift letter verification, things like that. Regardless of the situation, all needs to be in writing in order to protect the deposit money held in escrow. Should the notification not be in writing, the deposit money is at risk and the seller can keep the deposit. Issuance of the closing disclosure. The attorneys contact the buyers and sellers and issue a closing disclosure. This document outlines all the charges associated with the transaction line by line. It's a tough document to look at because on 1 to 2 pages there are a lot of charges. Now, one thing to keep in mind for either party is that the process to buy and sell the house has taken months on both sides, and you've had multiple professionals on either side, probably over 25 people involved in all stages of the transaction. This document represents all those professionals being paid on the same day. Tough document to look at, but at the same time, it's achieving a goal that both parties requested to be executed. Government requirements in order to close in the state of Massachusetts. There are a few documents that need to be produced by the seller in order to close on a property. A smoke certification indicating the property has passed a smoke inspection by the local town within the last 60 days. The town fire departments inspect the premise to make sure the property has the correct type and number of carbon monoxide and smoke detectors. Title V is a report that is required verifying the property has a functioning septic system. This report is due typically well before closing, but it can be given on the day of closing. One caveat here is if the buyers are accepting the property without a septic and the loan includes placing a system as part of the financing, then Title V is not required. Final bills associated with the property need to be paid in full and verified. This includes the town bills, including property taxes and sometimes water bills. And it is all the way up into the day of closing. Some towns issue final paid bills with a separate fee indicating that the bill is the final bill. So check with town officials. A walkthrough. The walkthrough takes place the day of closing, and the purpose is for the buyer to accept the condition of the house as the seller has delivered it. Should the buyer and seller disagree, there are additional negotiation conversations between the two representative agents to secure an agreeable outcome. I have had everything from a snowplow crashing into a garage and an entire house full of the seller's personal items. They didn't move out. It's never over until it's over. In Massachusetts, the buyer can walk away up until the day they purchase the house. No one can force someone to buy a home, and so the buyers can even walk away on the day of closing. Most buyers and agents don't want to touch this topic because it's uncomfortable, but that's the truth. This is another part of the negotiation phase that agents are responsible for. Some attorneys get involved, but not usually. Let me share some examples so you can see how some scenarios can be resolved. Let's say, for example, the buyer lost their source of income and can no longer purchase the house. Then the buyer would be entitled to the deposit back because they could no longer repay the loan. You see, the mortgage lender bank runs a credit 24 hours in advance before the purchase, and if something has happened and the buyer no longer meets the loan requirements, then the transaction can fall apart. Debt to income ratio is usually the biggest issue, so that is why purchasing a car, appliances, and furniture while you're in the mortgage process for most people is not a good idea. Even on the day of closing, the debt to income ratio needs to be in line with bank requirements. Say the buyer changed their mind because someone went into the hospital other than the buyer, and then the buyer decides that they don't want to purchase, but the bank still is able to fund the loan. Then the buyer's deposit is in jeopardy. Even though a buyer can walk away, typically the penalty is forfeiture of the deposit money. Or say the buyer went to a meeting and didn't like the neighbors and then decided against purchasing the house the night before the sale. Or the buyer decides they don't like the type of septic installed on the property,
but the seller has the Title V certification. Then in these scenarios, again, the buyer's deposit is in jeopardy. These are all things that can delay a sale or cancel it altogether. That is why it's never over until it's over, and the negotiation skill of your real estate agent and the relationship of the agent with the attorney for one particular side is an intangible strength during the final stage of the process. My advice, play nice in the sandbox because you never know when you will need to renegotiate the transaction. These are 15 terms you need to know. If you are looking for a real estate agent, I would love to help you. I'm Julie Marion with Huddle Real Estate, where we buy and sell every home as it is our own. Make it a great day.